What if the worst thing you ever did was something everyone else called an accident? I am 85 years old, and before my time runs out, I need to finally tell the truth about a night in 1963 that has lived inside me like a slow, quiet fire. For more than 6 decades, I have smiled, worked, loved, raised children, paid taxes and shaken hands in church, all while knowing that 7 people died because of something I did, and nobody ever knew. People say time heals everything. It doesn't. Time only buries things deeper. The world forgets. Newspapers yellow, photographs fade, but inside your chest the past stays loud. In 1963, I was a different person, younger, reckless in ways that only youth can justify, full of anger I didn't understand and pride I mistook for strength. That night wasn't planned, not in the way you might think. It wasn't some grand scheme, and it wasn't meant to hurt anyone. But intention doesn't change reality. Flames don't care what you meant to do. You have to understand the world back then. No cameras on every corner, no digital trails, no endless investigations on television. When tragedy struck, people looked for simple explanations because it was easier to sleep that way. Faulty wiring, they said. Bad luck, they whispered. They brought food to grieving families, held vigils and prayed. And I stood among them crying real tears because I was grieving too, only my grief had a shadow of guilt wrapped around it. For years, I told myself I would confess one day when my parents were gone, one day when my children were grown, one day when it wouldn't destroy as many lives, but one day has a habit of becoming never. So I carried it instead. Through every birthday, every holiday, every quiet night when the house was asleep, and the only sound was my heart beating far too loudly. I learned how to live while hiding, how to laugh with a secret lodged in my throat. Even now, my hands shake, remembering the smell of smoke, the orange, light against the sky, the sirens, the way the town fell silent after. Sometimes I wonder who I might have become if that night had never happened. Sometimes I wonder who those 7 people would have become if I hadn't made the choices I made. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder why the truth chose to stay with me this long. I'm not telling this for forgiveness. I don't expect it. I am telling it because truth has weight, and mine has become too heavy to carry any farther. The story has a beginning, and it has a night that changed everything. And before I leave this world, I will finally tell what really happened. If you're still here with me, it means this story is already touching something in you. Curiosity, unease, maybe even recognition. Before I go any further, I want to ask you something important. Listen closely to this story. Really listen, because it isn't only about fire or 1963. It's about choices, consequences, guilt, silence, and the way one moment can follow you through an entire lifetime. Tell me in the comments what part of this opening struck you the most, or what question instantly formed in your mind. Your perspective matters, and sometimes sharing what you're thinking helps you see your own life more clearly. If stories like this help you reflect, stay, because the truth I'm about to reveal has been buried for decades. Leave a like if you believe these confessions should be heard, and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this journey. There is more and much more, and we are only at the beginning. I grew up in a place where everyone knew your name, your grandparents, and your worst mistakes before you made them. Main Street was 3 blocks long. The movie theater changed posters once a month. Summer smelled like cut grass, and winter meant neighbors shoveling sidewalks. It was the sort of town that believed tragedy belonged to newspapers somewhere else. In 1963, that belief burned away. The night the fire came, it painted the sky the color of warning. You could see it from miles out on the highway, a trembling glow over roofs and church steeples. People poured out of their houses in slippers and coats over nightclothes, faces pale, voices thin and confused. Some prayed, some just stared. Sirens were slower then, fewer trucks, but the sound of them cut through every kitchen, every bedroom, every dream. Everyone knew someone inside. That was the cruel part about small towns. There is no safe distance. 7 names would be spoken for years afterward in lowered voices, with the gentleness people reserve for graves. Weddings had empty chairs. Christmas tables had permanent spaces no one dared fill. The school flag hung at half-mast until the rope frayed. You learned how silence could be louder than any bell. For weeks the air smelled faintly of smoke, as if the town itself was trying to forget and couldn't. Posters for community suppers curled on bulletin boards. Church steps collected flowers and notes. People brought casseroles because words failed them. At night, windows stayed lit later than usual. Sleep avoided us. I walked among them like everyone else, offering help, accepting embraces, nodding at questions no one wanted answered. They called it an accident, and the word became a blanket the town pulled over its eyes. But blankets get heavy. I watched fathers age in a season, mothers fold into a kind of quiet no doctor can treat. Children learned what permanent means. That place, those faces, are still with me. Streets change their names, buildings get painted, but memory keeps the old map. Every time I return, in dreams, I see what flames took and what they left behind inside us. And what they left in me is the reason I have to keep talking, because the story of what happened that night does not end here. It moves inward, toward the truth I spent a lifetime avoiding. The truth rarely arrives in one dramatic moment. It creeps in through small choices, whispers, and the kind of pride that convinces you nothing bad will happen. That night in 1963 began like 100 others, restlessness in my chest, anger with nowhere to go, the feeling that the world had somehow wronged me and owed me something back. I wasn't a villain in my own mind. I was just young, stubborn, and convinced I was invisible. That combination is more dangerous than malice ever is. I didn't wake up that morning thinking lives would end. It started with a stupid impulse, the kind you assume you'll walk away from. One careless action, one moment of, "it will be fine," and the world changed. People imagine disasters are born of elaborate plans. More often, they are born of ordinary recklessness and the belief that consequences only happen to other people. I remember the snap of my own heartbeat, the sudden wrongness in the air, the instant when annoyance turned into fear, and fear turned into something far worse, realization. The moment I saw the glow grow brighter than it should have, my mind broke into two people. One wanted to run toward it, to undo what had already begun. The other was frozen by terror, calculating how quickly blame travels in small towns. I wish I could tell you I was brave, that I shouted warnings and saved people. The truth is uglier and quieter. I hesitated. Sometimes a lifetime of guilt is born in a single hesitation. People later asked me where I'd been when it started. I had an answer ready before they finished the question. In towns like ours, if you speak steadily enough, people believe you. They want to. Belief feels safer than doubt. And when the official word accident finally appeared, stamped and solemn, a part of me collapsed with relief, while another part began a sentence that has never ended. But you know. That sentence has followed me into every room for 60 years. Here is the twist I did not understand until much later. The fire did not only happen outside. Another one started inside me that night, the slow burn of secrecy. It changed the direction of my life without anyone noticing. I avoided places, avoided certain names, avoided mirrors. I built a life around not being found out, and in doing so, I lost pieces of myself no one can list on paper. I will not describe flames or methods. Those details don't deserve oxygen, and I will not give anyone instructions for harm. What matters is responsibility. What matters is the line between "I didn't mean to" and "I did it." Crossing that line is quiet and permanent. Investigations in the early 1960s did not look like the ones you see today with endless footage and digital records. Back then, conclusions were often stitched together from interviews, charred fragments, and assumptions made by tired men who had already seen too much loss for one lifetime. The morning after the fire, our town felt like a body holding its breath. Yellow tape, ash in the air, shoes crunching on debris, and faces set in the expression people wear when they are trying not to. Imagine the worst while already knowing it. I watched from the edges, part of the crowd and yet not part of it at all. There is a particular loneliness in standing shoulder to shoulder with people who trust you. Neighbors nodded to me, grateful someone like me had shown up to help. They didn't know that my hands in my pockets weren't about the cold, they were about keeping them from shaking. Investigators spoke quietly, pointing at places where the building had failed, where the roof had given way, where the heat had been most intense. They were kind men, gentle in the presence of grief. They wanted an answer that allowed families to sleep, and an answer arrived. Faulty wiring. It rolled through the town like a tired sigh. Old building, outdated standards, a tragedy with a label simple enough to be bearable. Paperwork was filled in careful handwriting, reports were typed, insurance companies came and went. Once a cause has been printed, people cling to it the way shipwreck. Survivors cling to driftwood. It is less painful than floating in uncertainty. What no one saw were the quiet conveniences that allowed that conclusion to stand. The right person said, "It makes sense." The right person nodded. Questions that might have led elsewhere were never asked with enough force. No cameras, no recordings, only human memory. And memory is easily soothed when the alternative is unbearable. The town needed it to be an accident. The families needed it. And I hid behind. Their need, like a coward, hides behind a locked door. For years I replayed each conversation from those days. The officer who put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Terrible luck." The pastor who spoke of fate and mystery. I said little, because when you are guilty, words feel like matches you're afraid to strike. Every signature, every stamped document that declared accidental cause felt like a reprieve I hadn't earned. With each one, the truth sank a little deeper into me, like something heavy, dropped into deep water. The investigation closed. The town tried to heal, but nothing truly closes when the truth remains open inside a person. The official story became the public memory. My story became the private prison I lived in. And prisons without bars are sometimes the hardest to escape because no one else can see them. Numbers are tidy, names are not. 7 is a headline, a statistic that fits into a sentence. But each of those 7 had a laugh, a habit, a dream that made sense, only to the people who loved them. I learned their names one by one through church bulletins and hushed conversations on porches, and each name felt like another stone added to the weight I carried. There was a teacher who kept her students' drawings in a shoebox, a mechanic who was rebuilding a motorcycle he would never ride, a mother who wrote small reminders to herself in the margins of cookbooks, a teenager who had just said out loud that the future finally felt close enough to touch. Newspapers called them victims. My mind still calls them by their first names. Funerals in small towns are lessons in silence. You see entire family trees sitting in the same pews, shoulders touching, eyes fixed on a single point, because anywhere else is too painful. I shook hands I had no right to shake, accepted thanks I did not deserve for casseroles and folding chairs, and polite words that meant nothing against the enormity of absence. The hardest moments were the ordinary ones. A jacket, left hanging on a peg, a mailbox that still received letters, a dog waiting at a gate that would not open again. That is how loss really lives. Not in speeches, but in routines that suddenly have no one to complete them. Over the years, life kept moving the way rivers do after storms, but the current was never the same. Children grew up with empty spaces in their stories. Parents learned how to smile in photographs without their eyes joining in. Birthdays became complicated dates. The town paved new roads, painted new signs, built new walls, and yet the air around certain corners still felt fragile, as if everyone knew the past lingered there. Grief doesn't vanish. It changes shape and waits. I sometimes imagined who they would be today if that night had turned out differently. Graduations that would have happened, arguments that would have resolved, laughter that would have filled rooms that stayed too quiet. Those imagined futures are part of my punishment, and I do not run from that truth. Responsibility is not only about what you did, it is about the ripples you set in motion and the lives they keep touching long after the event has left the news. Their families never knew my role, and yet I was tied to them more closely than anyone realized. Every time I saw one of them in a grocery aisle or at a stoplight, time folded in on itself. I wanted to speak, and I did not speak. I wanted to disappear, and I did not disappear. The right thing and the terrified thing were never the same, and I chose silence again and again until it hardened into habit. That silence became part of who I was, shaping my choices, my voice, even my posture in a room. This is not a plea to reopen wounds or to sensationalize tragedy. It is my attempt to finally name what I have carried. 7 interrupted stories, 7 circles of people who learned how to live around a missing center, 7 reasons I could never convince myself that accident was a complete sentence. Their absence is the measure I use for my days, and it is why this confession exists at all. A secret is not something you keep in a drawer. It keeps you. It rearranges your days, edits your sentences, decides which roads you take and which doors you never open. After 1963, I did not simply grow older. I grew around the truth the way a tree bends around a nail hammered into its trunk. From the outside, my life looked ordinary. Job, marriage, children, holidays, photographs in frames. Inside, every milestone arrived with an echo. They are not here because of you. I became careful in ways no one noticed. I avoided fireplaces and bonfires, declined invitations to certain buildings, found reasons to stand near exits. I was suddenly responsible, the kind of person people trusted with keys and alarms. They thought it was reliability. It was fear wearing a neat shirt. Nights were the worst. The house would fall quiet, and that old glow in the sky would visit me again behind closed eyes. I learned how to function on little sleep, how to smile with tired bones, how to change the subject before anyone asked why my voice faltered. Guilt is not a single feeling. It is a lifelong education. It taught me gentleness because I knew the cost of carelessness. It taught me patience because I had taken something that could never be returned. It also taught me distance. I kept parts of myself locked away from even the people I loved most, as if intimacy itself might loosen my tongue. My children grew up, believing I was simply private. They never knew how many sentences I swallowed back, because the first word of honesty might pull the rest behind it. There were moments when the truth almost escaped. A news story, a smell of smoke in winter air, a question from a child who'd learned about the old tragedy at school and wanted details for a project. Each time, my heart lurched as if a door had blown open in a storm. I became skilled at closing doors. I told myself I was protecting others from scandal, from confusion, from the pain of knowing the world is messier than they believed. But I was also protecting myself, and I carry that contradiction with me. The strange thing about carrying guilt is that it shapes your kindness too. I tried to live in a way that balanced scales no one else could see. I volunteered, showed up when people needed help moving, listened longer than most. Not to erase anything, that's impossible, but because doing nothing felt unbearable. Even happiness arrived differently. Joy always had a shadow standing beside it, reminding me that my good fortune existed in a world where 7 chairs stayed empty. As the years passed, the fear of being discovered slowly transformed into something else. The fear of dying with the truth still buried. Secrets age badly. They stiffen inside you. Doctors talk to me now about heart and lungs. I nod, thinking of the weight I've never named out loud. I am not confessing to be free. I am confessing because the story is larger than my comfort, and silence has had more than its share of years. This is the part I have circled my entire life, like a man walking around a locked door he is afraid to open. I am not going to give you instructions, or technical details, or anything that could ever be copied. That is not what this is. What matters is responsibility, not mechanics. The truth is simple in a way that hurts. I was the one whose careless act began what everyone else called an accident. I crossed a line between near miss and tragedy, and then the world closed the file while my conscience kept it open for 62 years. For decades, I built a life on top of a sentence that never finished. I told myself that speaking would shatter my family, that reopening old wounds would only multiply pain. Part of that was true. Part of it was fear dressed as concern. I was terrified of the hand on my shoulder, the faces of those families if they ever knew. I was terrified of becoming the villain in every story told in town. And I was ashamed because people trusted me, admired me, asked my advice, all while I carried this invisible stain. So why now? Because time has thinned the walls I built. When you reach my age, the future is not a horizon. It is a short path you can see the end of. You begin to understand that the only thing you truly take with you is what you refused to face. My body has grown lighter in some ways and heavier in others. Doctors measure my blood pressure. I measure my unfinished sentences. And I realize that silence does not protect the past. It only buries the truth alongside you. I have imagined every possible reaction to what I'm saying. Anger, disbelief, hatred, cold silence. I do not argue with any of them. I am not asking to be excused. There is no neat redemption here, no ribbon to tie around a broken story. There is only honesty arriving very late, as honesty often does. The official record will never change, and maybe it shouldn't. But I can change one thing. Whether I leave this world still pretending that accident tells the whole story. If there is any mercy in this confession, it is not for me. It is for truth itself, the idea that reality matters, even when it hurts, even when it arrives decades after it should have. I spent a lifetime trying to live gently in the shadow of one violent night. Some days I managed it, some days I did not. I have no grand lesson to offer beyond this. One moment can become the architecture of your entire life, and you do not get to choose whether it stays. And still, despite everything, I am human. I have loved, failed, tried again, made breakfasts, told bad jokes, watched sunsets, and held sleeping children. None of that erases what happened. None of it is meant to. Life is not an eraser. It is a ledger. Tonight I am writing honestly in the column I avoided. If you have stayed with me through all of this, I'm grateful you listened. If you feel anything, shock, anger, sorrow, or just quiet, you can write "I hear you" so I know I'm not speaking into an empty room. If you are still here, listening to the last words of an old man's confession, thank you. It means you didn't turn away from the uncomfortable parts, and that says something about you. Stories like this aren't easy to hear, and they're even harder to tell. But truth only lives when someone is willing to stay until the end. If this video made you think, reflect, or feel anything at all, I'd like to ask you for something simple. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. There are more voices, more secrets, more lives that changed in quiet rooms and never made the headlines. Your support is what keeps these stories being told. If you stayed all the way to this moment, let me know by writing in the comments, "I stayed until the end." Those 5 words tell me you were here with me, from the first question to the last breath of this confession. Leave a like as well. It helps this story reach others who might need to hear it, even if they don't know it yet. And before you go, don't rush away. Another video is appearing on your screen right now. Another secret, another untold truth, another life lived in shadows. Click it, stay with us a little longer, and keep listening to the things people only say when they believe time is finally running out.